Yeah, on.
Two twins.
It took me forever. I don't know if you recall this or if you knew this all along. I didn't realize. Welcome to Two Twins and an Album, by the way. I didn't realize that was Freedom, the Wham song, until like maybe like 5 years ago. It's like, okay, because that organ intro. And welcome to episode Heinz 57. By the way, as well.
Yeah.
You know, that intro was so iconic because of the video, you know, and all that you just kind of like thought it was this. And it does remind you a little bit of Dearly Beloved, you know, the Let's Go Crazy Prince intro.
Yeah. Which came first? Because it's a little eerie that two 80s monster albums and hits both started pretty much the same way.
Oh, Prince's had to come earlier because this was later in the decade. So it had to be Prince. But
so let's just make this clear because it's going to set up maybe another theme later in the show. So George Michael clearly ripped off Prince here, right? A little bit. Church organ intro, dramatic, you know, starter.
It could be argued. Because, yeah, this was about 3 years after Prince did it. And then Prince came in. How about you and your friends versus me and the revolution?
And then he served us pancakes.
Let's run a play. Darling Nikki, Computer Blue. What's better?
Why don't you go immerse yourselves in the river in the rivers of Lake Minnetonka?
Why don't you go purify yourself?
Purify yourself
of Lake Minnetonka.
So brilliant.
Crew of flunkies. What's better? The Chapelle Rick James, the Chapelle Prince, or underrated, the Chapelle R. Kelly? I'm going to piss on you. What's your favorite of the three?
All strong in their own ways. First of all, it's a great argument. I've had this many times. Usually the first off the island for me would be Rick James. It's so incredible. But I think that the lines from it became maybe too much part of the lexicon, right? Like, yeah. And even some like cocaine's a hell of a drug. Like some of the lines became so familiar that they lost a little bit of their edginess. So I would say that the Rick James one will be the first one to go. And then it's down to two, you know, completely unique, different, but similar in the fact that they are just so genius in what Chapelle knew he was able to do. So I personally think the Prince one is the best. I think it's the best.
Yeah.
You know, it's the best visually.
Yeah.
It's the smartest. It's got some like deeper references in it, you know.
And Chapelle's physical performance as Prince is incredible. I mean, it's just so good. But you know, the R. Kelly, I'm going to piss on you is so good. I mean, I watched it the other day for the first time in maybe like a couple of years, which is longer than I should go without watching it. And I just died. It was just, I mean, it's just so great. Drip, drip, drip. You know, I mean, it's just so good.
I mean, how amazing was that show just in general?
Yeah,
it was so fun.
Yeah, it was pretty special.
His last couple stand-up specials are absolutely
the Juicy Smoulier routine is one of the best things comedy's done in the last couple of years. I mean,
totally, yeah.
The French actor, you know,
he's the greatest, man.
Yeah, so good. So, are you ready to talk about Georgios Kyriasos Penelaiotou?
You know, I've learned a couple of things already. I did know that he had a different name than George Michael, but I didn't realize it was clearly a Greek name, right?
Yeah, I assumed he's Greek.
Yeah. And then, so Freedom was originally a Wham song because I only know Freedom 90, which is by George Michael. So is the original Freedom, it wasn't as good as Freedom 90? Because Freedom 90 is a pretty big hit.
Well, Freedom 90 was really like, it was like very George Michael. It was very like sexy and sort of, like a dance-ish track type thing. Yeah. And the original Freedom was it was more of like a bubblegum song. It was the dun, 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 dun,
oh, really? Oh.
I don't want your freedom. I don't need to.
Oh, yeah.
Around.
Okay, I've heard that.
I don't want no. Hang on, I'm on fire, baby. Part-time love just brings me down. Yeah. So yeah, it was a very poppy, very up tempo poppy song by Wham. So they had "Wake Me Up Before You Go and "Freedom" were kind of their poppy up tempo tracks. But the one that really, I think brought the house down was "Careless Whisper." One of the great saxophone tracks of our time. Probably the most iconic saxophone song besides maybe Baker Street. I think those two are probably in a league of their own.
Is that the that one?
Yeah, exactly. Straight up Skinamax right there.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, you try to sing that song without shedding a tear.
See, you think shed a tear? I see that more of like a 80s mom get in the mood sort of song. You know what I mean? But that's the way I see it. Is that
like an Alan Alda track?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely a pillow talk track. No doubt.
Yeah.
Here is "Careless Whisper" by Wham.
Yeah.
Go
and everyone just gets all excited, and all the middle-aged women just get all revved up,
Yeah, right, exactly. That's how I remember that song more than emotional. But who knows, man? Maybe people cried to it. Maybe they did both. I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I guess that's possible. What's interesting, Nub? There's only one episode we've done that has sold more records than this. Do you know what it is?
Well, I didn't realize our episodes were that successful, but that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that our episodes are selling that many copies.
No, the album, not the album.
Oh, the album. Oh, yeah. The album.
This podcast is the most unlucrative thing that exists in the music. It's
reverse lucrative.
That's right. Will. Yes, it's a cost center, not a revenue generator. Yeah.
Okay, so there's an album we did that sold more than Wham.
There's only one record we've done in our previous episodes that had sold more than, not Wham, sold more than tonight's record.
Well, it had to come during like a very successful time just in the industry. We've covered a few things that were too early to sell that many, and then we've covered some things that were too late to sell that many.
I really think you've got this one. I mean, you haven't been terribly good on the trivia of late. I really think you got this one. I do.
Last couple trivia things have been tough. It's got to be probably something really pop and mainstream.
I mean, take your time. No rush or anything.
Yeah. I'm going through the Rolodex right now. I'm assuming it was not King Crimson's Red.
All right, it was Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jagged Little Pill sold 33 million, and this one did a measly 25 So
can you believe how many records these guys used to sell? It's incredible when you compare it to right now.
It's just absurd. But hey, before we get to that, let's see if the LPs you've been listening to have sold well. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Let's go round and round. Nubbins, what has been round and round for you, buddy? Take it away.
So it's not common that you would have, 2 weeks in a row where there's the same artist on Round and Round, but it's not common that the artist would basically release 2 albums within a year. And so Ryan Adams' Big Colors, which is now, this is the Electric album. So he did Wednesdays, which is the Sad Bastard album. Then he just digitally released, but there's a vinyl copy on its way at some point, which is the Electric album that was going to come out before he hit all of his troubles. And that is Big Colors. And listened to it this past weekend and really enjoyed it. It's him being more of a rock and roller than a sad guy with a guitar. And it's very, very good. And I look forward to continue to digging into it. Kind of thinking, I wonder if there's going to be a tour there. You just wonder who's going to tour again, who's not. He's in a little bit more of a complex situation. So who knows?
I hope he goes on tour. I really hope he does.
You can't wait.
Yeah. So I can not go.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Next is that, very short title for an album. You walked up shaking in your boots, but you stood tall enough to raging bull. You did this one previously. This is Humphreys McGee with the album full of instrumentals.
What do you think of it? You think it's cool that they did the walkout songs in the studio?
I think conceptually it's super cool that they did it. It's neat to hear the songs in the studio context. I also will tell you that it's not as good. None of the versions are as good as what they do live, maybe with the exception of October Rain. October Rain's just so, fantastic that it gets pulled off very, very well in the studio. The others sound just a little sterile in the studio after you see them all live, because, I'm sure you've seen all of these played live. I've seen a number of them. And so, it's a cool listen for a fan. I'm sure that a non-Humphreys fan would buy this and be incredibly confused, by the whole ordeal.
That's part of what I think is cool about it is this is for the fans that really like their music, that don't just want to go to their shows and spin around with glow sticks. This is like kind of I think this is catered for sort of their like musician-ish audience, which I think is kind of cool.
That's a great call. Yeah, agreed. And anything that Humphreys can do to try and not cater to, but try and connect and stay connected with that group of the audience would be really good, because there's a whole lot of people out there, us both included, that love this band because of their musicianship and not necessarily because of glow sticks. So but I've been listening to it a lot. There's a lot to dive into there. And then lastly is a more obscure album that I just got on vinyl, which is the album is called Essenes by a band called Godic. And this is from 1978. It's a Spain-based band. This is considered one of those one-off, legendary progressive rock albums. It's all instrumental, and the musicianship is just out of this world. And it's a really, really good listen. It's one of those things that, it's not even underrated. It's just overlooked, but it's got beautiful cover art, and it's just a really, really nice album. So Godic Essenes. And that's what's running around for me, T. What's spinning around for you these days?
Well, I got actually a couple of new things here. The first is, I was just listening to it yesterday, the new album by The Killers, and it's called Pressure Machine. And, I love what these guys do musically, but I got to say the lyrics of this are very distracting. I mean, so Brandon Flowers,
wait a minute, you're listening to lyrics now?
Yeah, well, yeah. So Brandon Flowers to me is a very intriguing artist, and obviously has produced some good, and I think in many ways fairly important work sort of to the mainstream for the last, almost 20 years, I think it's been. And, they're this interesting, they're from Las Vegas, that he has this fascination with Americana, and they did this record in I think it was the early 2000s that a lot of people are familiar with, called Sam's Town, which I thought was a phenomenal record. And it was a little bit conceptual in that it was themed around kind of small town Americana and a lot of different stories and themes and interesting. Well, this album Pressure Machine is like essentially running the exact same play, except more direct and more obvious. I don't know if it's a story or if it's just a concept, but it's sort of picking apart life in West Texas, and there are sound bites from real people, and then like every song, the lyrics and the vocals, as per usual with the Killers, are very pronounced, and like every song is about like somebody in a small town, like everyone, and it's like it kind of like gets annoying after a while, so it's like, this is very unusual for me, but it kind of distracted me from what was going on musically, that there was this like repetitive, almost sort of annoying, like repetition around small town Americana, West Texas going on throughout this album. I don't know. I'm trying to put that aside and understand what they're trying to do musically, and it's fine. It sounds good, but yeah, is an interesting deal on the deal here. The second is from a band that I really love, kind of a newer band called Churches with a V. And this is sort of an electronic type of group, but they've put out really good stuff. And they have a new record called Screen Violence, which I haven't heard yet. And the third is, it's not new, but it's new to me. I didn't realize that The Darkness had put out a live album a few years ago, live at the Hammersmith. And it's cool, man. Have you heard it? They're a cool live band. I mean, sometimes you wonder if they're able to get out there and pull it off audibly, the way that obviously, because, doing some of what they do is not terribly easy, but it sounds great. It's a great live capturing of that band.
I mean, I can only best answer by saying, no, I've not heard it. No, I've not heard it.
Yeah.
I have not heard the live album. No, I haven't heard the live album.
But I'm sure it sounds good. Well, you should hear it. It's pretty sweet. And something that I didn't even know existed until fairly recently. Picked it up and I am quite liking it. Another record that many people decided to pick up and enjoy is tonight's featured selection. One of the things that I kind of realized, Nub, this is episode Heinz 57 here. We really haven't done that many dead people, if you think about it. I mean, we did The Doors,
Yeah.
And we did, Typo, and Peter died, but everyone else is still kicking.
Well, we did Nirvana.
We did Nirvana.
Kurt's dead. I don't know if you heard that.
Kurt's dead. That's a fact. Other than that, most of the artists we've done are, still around to tell the tale. So it's kind of unique. I actually had kind of there are some people that you sort of need to still like double check. It's like, I think they're dead, but I'm going to double check this just to make sure. And I got to be honest, for me, George Michael was one of those. It was like, I think he died, and it was actually on Christmas Day, which is ironic because of the Last Christmas, single of 2016. And I don't know that I know that there was a physiological cause of death released. I assume this had to do with, years of abuse, because he was only 53 and, died due to kind of heart and liver issues, which I believe came with, this guy had a pretty hard back half of his life. It was, it was riddled with, scandal and drama and rehab and, all kinds of issues. I don't think that he was a guy that
never seemed like happy. I mean, we'll talk about this when we get into the track by track, but he never seemed like he ever enjoyed success.
Yeah.
Just complicated, I would say.
Very. And, the more you dig into it, and I kind of, breathed on it earlier, but, he was an artist. I mean, he was he wrote all of his songs. And when I first listened to this record, it's sort of in preparation, and it had been a while since I had gone top to bottom on it. The first thing that jumped out at me was, wow, this album is really like almost perfectly produced for its time. And you're like, this must have been, one of the, label's finest producers and, one of those pop producers that was kicking out, all these gems at this time. And you look at who produced the record, and it was George Michael. It's like, wow. I mean, so there is no question that this guy was talented. And I think, a lot of times you think of, a guy like George Michael and you put him in with some of these other more fabricated, produced, pop stars that had people writing for them and people recording for them and, people producing for them and people telling them how to do X, Y, and Z in order to sell an album of this magnitude and create an album of this magnitude. He didn't really have that. He was a guy that could create, that could compose. And it kind of makes tonight's album an interesting one to discuss because at a glance, you'd think that it was something that was, sort of created in a lab, as many albums of this nature are. But this wasn't. This was an artist, output that certainly was created in a brilliant way at the time that caught on worldwide in a way that few other albums have. And it really was because of this one single artist.
Yeah, it's an interesting story for sure. And I'm sure we'll get into it in the nerdy deets. I think when you go back and listen to it, it's just the success of it was so huge. And it's so absent from our modern times. This single album from, a relatively new solo artist that just had all of these hits, and you make this assumption. I think you make a good, really important point about that he was an artist, because you make this assumption that he was, record label created, or that he had teams of songwriters that were doing everything. And this album, there's a lot of musicians, but he's right there in it. And that gives it a lot of credibility, I think, particularly for somebody who is not necessarily revered as a vocalist. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about. Like, was George Michael a good singer? Because I'm not totally convinced sometimes that he was. He wasn't bad by any means, but it's interesting to think about the role of image, the role of sexiness, the controversy, because this album clearly is one of the early-ish examples of the more controversial, the better. And it aligned him with Madonna much more than, let's say other musicians who were more credible as musicians, which is interesting because he's really not like Madonna at all in any way.
Yeah. Indeed. I mean, there's a song on here, we'll get to it, where you've got to be insane to question his vocal prowess after hearing it, but we'll get to it. Why don't we first tackle those nerdy deets?
You want some dirty deeds? Yeah. You want some dirty deeds?
All right. Faith was released on October 30th, 1987. It was the first solo album from George Michael, the previous co-frontman, although I don't know, was he really the frontman of Wham? What did Andrew Ridgeley do, by the way? Was he
he's a race car driver or something, right?
Now? Yeah, I think so.
Wasn't he always and like dabbled in music? And then after Wham broke up, I think he actually like got seriously back into race car driving.
Oh, really?
From what I understand, it was pretty, I mean, you have to look it up, but I just remember this. I think he was like a pretty good race car driver or something.
Interesting.
Like yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, he was also a pretty good first officer, I suppose, although I don't really know. I guess I should have done more research on what Andrew Ridgeley actually did for Wham. I know he wrote some songs with George Michael, so maybe it was a true collaboration, but
I think he was really photogenic and had great hair.
I
think that had a lot to do with it.
That was definitely a strength. But, obviously, George Michael came onto the scene, as the face and voice of the band Wham. And then this was his first solo effort. This was on Columbia Records, produced, as I mentioned, by George Michael, written by George Michael. There's only one song that actually has a co-writing credit. So clearly, he drove the ship in terms of this entire output, which is impressive. 9 tracks, quick and to the point. The CD version does have, as if the first 2 weren't enough, you got a third part of I Want Your Sex part 3. And can't wait to get to that one. But that was on the CD version as kind of a bonus cut. But the main sort of original LP consists of the 9 tracks. And I like how it's quick and to the point. I mean, clearly I'm a little bit more in the camp of, a shorter, it's almost Revolver-esque in that a shorter record can sometimes be, much more efficient and much more easy to take in than those that tried to pile on 14 tracks just for the sake of it. It has the rare distinction of being certified diamond, over 25 million copies worldwide. So, you're getting into a pretty elite company there of, a couple, 3 handfuls of albums that have reached that distinction. Won the Grammy for Album of the Year. So George Michael did not have to give the Grammy back now. He was actually able to keep it. And, for the top album of the year, not terribly surprising that was the case in 87. And the great Rolling Stone, which neither of us pay a lot of attention to, rated Faith as the 151st greatest album of all time. So, I think what'll be interesting today, Nubs, is clearly this album was commercial and clearly it was acclaimed. But I think what we're going to decide is why was that the case? And was it good? Or did it just hit at the right time? I think that's one of the interesting assessments with a record like Faith.
That all sounds lovely. I think the big part of the nerdy deets that stands out is the musicians. You look at the list of people that played on this and it is vast, but a lot of kind of specialized performances. The biggest key is George Michael contributing musically to this. I think he played drums on one song, which is kind of cool. A lot of keyboards. And clearly he had a strong hand. He was not a bystander. He had a strong hand in the sound, the textures.
Strong hand, and boy, what an ass, huh? I
mean, oh, great ass.
What a caboose on that guy. Jeez.
Great caboose. Fantastic. Great beard. Good hair. Yeah. Like he was he maybe was like the first to really rock that like thin kind of sexy beard.
The stubble. Yeah.
The dangling earring.
It's getting hot in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
well, speaking of complex people, Nubs, let's get to your wonder story. Nubs, George Michael, let us have it. What do you remember, buddy?
So weird to talk about. So we've talked about our mom before. Right. She took us to Woodstock 94 and really was supportive of our musical endeavors.
Yeah.
But she probably wouldn't admit this today, but she had like pretty cutting edge music taste for a mom, she stayed very current. And I never quite understood why she liked what she liked, but she liked a lot of stuff that was much more modern than what her colleagues in motherhood may have been listening to.
Colleagues.
Yeah. One of those,
her peers in motherhood.
I like colleagues.
Yeah, I do too.
Great word. She had a rather modest, but really effective collection of 7-inch singles. Most of them in picture sleeves. She had this rack. Remember that metal rack that we used to pull out?
Yeah.
And she probably had like 50 singles.
And this was with the little yellow plastic thing that you'd put in the middle of the 45, right?
Yeah.
So that it would fit on the turntable.
Yeah. It was like, it's funny you mentioned that because it was before the industry, the vinyl industry, like kind of said, we could just put in those small holes in the 7-inch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who are the ad wizards who came up with that idea?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I remember like jukeboxes all over the world were futzing around with this large hole thing. And it's like, you can just put the regular hole in there. Right. Actually, jukeboxes might be why they had the larger hole.
Probably cut you down on some costs. Actually, you only need one poke.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So she had Yes, Owner of a Lonely Heart. She had a bunch of other like 80s pop things. But the one I remember the most was she had the 7-inch of George Michael, I Want Your Sex. But I remember
she sure did.
We're like 6 years old or whatever. She's like jamming this throughout the house.
And you wonder why we're so troubled.
Yeah, right. Exactly, dude. Exactly. But the thing that was the sticking point there was that the radio version was I Want Your Love.
Right.
Edited it.
Yes.
And I remember when I was young going to my mom and being like, wait a minute, like the one I hear on the radio is I Want Your Love. And the other one says a different word. And like, what is this all about? And like, I have to credit George Michael for me maybe learning about the birds and the bees because my inquiry, right? I know. My inquiry of like, what is this song and what does it mean? I think jump-started some rather important conversations that what one can have in their life. So that song was like my first experience with that word. And what is sex? What does he mean by that? Because I remember being really confused. It's like, what does he mean? I want your sex.
Yeah, it was you knew that it was.
You knew it was dirty.
Yeah. You knew that it was something randy, but you didn't. I mean, we were 7. You didn't know fully what was going on. And,
correct. It led to more questions than answers. Let's just put it that way.
Kind of still does even to this day. But right.
It
certainly did at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was a year, 87, 88, kind of around that time where like George Michael was like it. I mean, it was because you look at the run of singles on this album. I remember, we'll talk about him, of course. Father Figure, the video. I was very startled by that.
The videos are definitely a big part of this one, in terms of the imagery and the recollection,
Huge, huge. So here's this guy. He's talking about, I Want Your Sex and Father Figure and Monkey. This stuff was really heavy for a 7-year-old, man. I'm just trying to figure out how to add, 3 and 5. And pop culture is flooded with this guy wearing a cross earring who's talking about Father Figure and shit. And I'm just like, huh? Like, I was very interested, but also maybe a little scared, for lack of a better word, like a little intimidated. It's like, this is really adult, Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think that's the thing, T. It's like, this was an era, and we're in a similar era now where pop stars are really catering towards like teenagers and younger, right? Like, look at the K-pop movement right now and everything that's going on. It's all catered towards like elementary, middle school age kids. George Michael was a young pop star, but his music was so adult, even more so in some ways than Madonna, I would say. In some ways, Madonna found a way to become adult real fast, but it was heavy. These were like big time adultish themes. And I was,
and part of that too was, Wham was essentially like a boy band, in terms of the type of music they were doing. I mean, I obviously didn't sound like like an early 2000s boy band, but it certainly sounded like a late 80s boy band, even though there were only 2 of them. And it was pretty bubblegummy and pretty upbeat and pretty sort of conservative in a way. And, you can tell that part of, and again, you got to credit him for this more so than somebody trying to polish his image. It was like, all right, we're going to go edgy and we're not going to, half-ass it. Right. we're going to full ass it in tight jeans is what we're going to do.
Yeah. That's what they should have called the album, dude. Full ass and tight jeans.
It would have worked.
I don't know if you're going to go with this one too, but it's just another funny George Michael thing was when we were in high school, there was a presentation that was made at some point that was trying to scare everyone into not listening to popular music, And I remember one of the examples was George Michael, but it wasn't off Faith. It was this song called Fast Love that was off one of his later albums. And this teacher was like playing these music videos as an example of like, this is why you should.
Funny. I totally forgot about that. That's great. Yeah.
And the teacher, there's a whole, whole saga behind the whole thing, but this teacher was kind of a nerdy voice. So he's just like, he's doing like a voiceover while we're watching this video. And all I'm thinking the whole time was, oh, this new George Michael song. Cool. I get to hear this in school. But he was like voicing over, like, George Michael. No, it's the nerdier voice. George Michael, this guy, and he goes on and all this stuff about George Michael and why he's the devil.
That sounds exactly like this teacher.
But and that was kind of a later memory that I still think about. It's like, oh yeah, George Michael, the guy that did that song in the 90s that nobody cared about, that was used as an example for us not to listen to all the things we constantly listen to.
That's funny. Well, and I think George Michael made an appearance in Hell's Bells, The Dangers of Rock Music. If I'm not mistaken, I think they showed. I
remember. Yeah.
Maybe actually they did show him because he wore the cross earring. And I remember, the host of Hell's Bells was very upset about that. That was not.
That didn't jive with him. Yeah, no. You're right. I think there was like not a montage, but like a series where they showed different imagery. Yes. And I want to say they showed George Michael with his cross earring,
Correct.
Yeah. Those are some wonder stories from my end. I'm dying to hear yours.
No, it's similar stuff. I mean, the vivid recollection of our mom just jamming to I Want Your Sex in the car.
In the car and at the house. Yeah, she had that like good like hi-fi system at the house.
She played it
so loud,
dude. She played it all the time, like just all the time. And we're 7 and just like, well, like what's going on here? But
do you remember you and I kind of formed a little dance to it? We were kind of like Do you remember that?
I kind of do. Yeah.
That was kind of our way of coping with the trauma of to hear this song over and over again. You know?
Yeah. That was always, I mean, she was funny. I mean, she loved like Rick Springfield. And I also remember even at like age like 8 being like, hey mom, I don't think he likes girls. And
right.
Like, yeah. He was in total denial. It's like, what? No, that's just his sex appeal. You know, that's just, and it's like, I don't know, mom. I don't think he's into you, you know?
Yeah.
You know, at a very young age, but it took a while for that to eventually become confirmed.
You're pretty observant, T.
Yeah. Right. But, you know, the only other thing I think you got to give a shout out to one of the great television shows, that being Arrested Development, and having Michael Cera play the character of George Michael. You know, as that's kind of genius to have that character be named George Michael. I just thought that was really funny. But yeah, I mean, listen, when you grow up in the 80s, this is part of pop culture, and the sort of transition from Wham into being a solo artist, and you know, kind of a bummer how things sort of eventually turned out during the back half of his life. But, you know, clearly during this time, this was an artist and a performer and a voice and a style that, you know, was a big deal, a very, very big deal. And why don't we try and figure out, you know, what led to that big deal? Because this record really was just that here in late 1987. And let's plow through the track by track on Faith. Nub, you ready?
Hey, man, I'm ready because you know what? You got to have faith.
And by the way, to that point, there will be no Fred Durst. As much as we both love Fred Durst, there will be no Fred Durst during the track by tracks.
Can we at least debate which version one likes better?
Okay, let's do it. Okay, here, let's get to the tracks.
When the drum beats go like this.
All right. Well, listen, you know, there are certain, you know, iconic starts to certain albums. And, you know, we already kind of played the organ intro during the intro of the episode. But what that takes you into is a song that made the Bo Diddley beat, you know, more famous than Bo Diddley did himself. And that is track 1, Faith.
Baby, I know you're asking me to stay. Say please don't go away. You say I'm giving you the blues. Maybe.
Now, you know, what jumps out at you right away, at least for me, because I mean, we all know this song. This didn't necessarily need to be dove into too hard for familiarity, but the production jumped out to me. You know, this is a very cleanly produced record, and I'm sure a lot of that was intentional. The vocal effect is perfect. There's a tight delay on the vocal throughout the record that really works, and I think that gets very exemplified here on Faith, where you know, you get a lot of hearing the voice without any instrumentation and sort of a cappella. But you know, I mean, listen, it's a pretty timeless song. But more than anything, Nubs, I mean, again, what an ass. You know, I mean, just what a tight package in those jeans.
yeah, it's real.
You know what I mean?
It's funny because musically, it is the Bo Diddley beat, but it's 100% Elvis to me. The whole thing is Elvis. He's basically doing an Elvis impression the entire song. And I'm not talking about dancing. I'm talking about singing.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, this is an Elvis Presley impression, right? All that kind of staccato thing during the verses. And then he's borderline crooning, like George Michael style crooning on the pre-chorus. And then he goes right back into that staccato thing. I always loved it because it's the ultimate example. Just, you know, you know what I mean? It's just that, to your point, super tight. Everything is so tight.
Yeah.
On the song, maybe too tight in some ways. It's a little rigid. But
that ass is tight. I can tell you that much.
Totally. but it's straight Elvis. The whole thing is just straight up Elvis. So you can't forget that in that 1987, we're just not that far removed from someone being heavily influenced by Elvis. I'm sure that George Michael's parents or other generation above him were directly impacted by Elvis Presley, probably more than any other pop culture person, maybe aside from the Beatles. So that's a big factor here. And it's basically like a 3-minute Elvis impression that's going on here. And obviously one that really connected with really audiences all over the world. I mean, this was a smash.
Yeah, it's a good call. This was number one for 4 weeks. That's a very long time to be number one, especially at this time. This is ranked the number 322 song of the century. This is by the RIAA. So, a little bit more of a credible outlet than Rolling Stone magazine, I would say, but pretty impressive credential there. What's interesting is George Michael wasn't a big lyrics guy. He would actually write the lyrics as he was laying down the vocal line in the studio. He would literally sit there at the microphone and sort of write down lyrics that he thought was either fitting the moment or the mood or the vocal line that he had constructed, which is kind of neat because some of these lyrics, you look at them and you think that maybe they're heavily calculated or whatever. And, he would actually do this kind of on the fly, which I thought was kind of cool. The song was originally 2 minutes long and he didn't really think much of it. He thought it was just kind of a quick little ditty. To your point, kind of a little tight little Elvis thing. And then, enough people were telling him like, man, I really like that one, that demo of that Faith song. So they added the guitar solo and kind of built it out to be an actual, they only added about a minute to it, but enough to make it, actually a full song rather than I think what he originally intended was just a small ditty. I'm pretty sure he's glad he did that. It was number one in the US. There's a theme here of a few of these songs being just enormous in the US, not quite as strong in his home country in the UK. And Faith was one of them. This actually never hit number one in the UK, which is surprising. It actually, it was in the top 10 in the UK and it was knocked off by a song called You Win Again by the Bee Gees, which is one of my favorites.
Oh, you love that song.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
but a song that was never really that popular in the US. So it's kind of interesting the way the UK and the US charts, sort of interact. But
this album is very American. This is not a European record in terms of its tone and its sound, its themes. I think this album was, and again, I'm not saying intentionally so, who knows, but it's flooded with way more American influences than it is European influences. That's for damn sure. And I think that's why it connected so well with the market.
That's a great point. Well, the next track is along those same lines of being tremendously popular in the US. It was one of the 4 number one singles. And one of those 4 certainly hit home here on track 2 with Father Figure. So to your point, this is certainly a U.S. Sort of mid-tempo pop song. I think the original idea that he had was for this to be kind of like more of an up-tempo, like a dance track. And, I'm not sure if he eventually changed his mind or was sort of advised that this would be better as a more sort of spacey, strung out pop song. It's a unique track of its time to where there isn't this big sort of backbeat. There's a lot of sweeping elements in terms of keyboard layers. I really like the synth sound. I think it's really strong. And it's a perfect vocal, both with effect and performance to kind of lay down on top of this. I think this is a fantastic song. I've always loved it. The middle section's really good. The way it closes out is great. Some great vocal performances. This isn't the one I'm referring to where you can't deny that he is a strong vocalist. But man, I think Father Figure is kind of a perfect 80s pop song, a great track to hear I don't know, Nub, thoughts?
I think first and foremost, remove the lyrics, and it is a gorgeous melody. I mean, those verses, that little piano that's in the background, what a great layer.
Yeah.
And I have to think that might have been Michael. I mean, I think he plays keyboards on this song. And it's such a beautiful little thing that they put in the background. I like that it's one of the first hit singles I remember that really took advantage of space.
Right.
It's a really spacious song. It's ambient. It's just beautiful. It really is. It's a beautifully written song. The problem is that lyrically, it's kind of a creeper. I don't think this song would have flown in 2021. I don't think this would have made it through, kind of the, shall we say, the political correctness meter.
I don't think every song on this album would have made it through.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, true.
That's part of what's fun about this. It's like, you could never make an album like this now. I mean, and wait till we get to the next track. I mean, you just couldn't do it.
Correct.
And nor is it like to be that literal and that, in some ways lyrically graphic is not the current direction. It's all metaphoric and it's all, story based. I mean, this is as blunt as it gets. And yeah, I agree with you. There are a lot of lyrical tones on this that wouldn't hold up, but man, I'm with you. I mean, what a gorgeous pop song.
Amazing. Yeah, it really is. And again, like I mentioned earlier too, T, like as a kid, I didn't get it. It was too much for me. It was too heavy. It was too deep. Years later, when I was kind of rediscovering this album, I was like, this song is incredible, Yeah. And I'm not even saying the lyrics are a problem or a distraction, because you get older, you kind of understand where he's going here. I just don't think it would have been able to be released today, but there's a lot of things that you can't do today. Right. So, in terms of
true,
in terms of, its role on this album and its role as a very, very unique part of the 80s kind of music history, I love it. I think it's a spectacular song.
I'm glad to hear that. We see that one the same way. And, I think it's a perfect 80s song. All right. Let's see if you think this one is perfect. I Want Your Sex.
Oh boy.
I've waited so long, baby, now that we're friends. The man's got his patience, and here's where mine ends. I want your sex.
It's that melody right there, dude. It's that melody.
It's the whole thing. The way it starts, with that ding do baba, ba ding do baba, that beat.
Yeah.
It's just all so wrong. I mean, it's just so wrong, but so right, at the same time. I mean, it's such a fun listen now, because again, like, you just could never do this today.
Yeah.
It was so edgy. It was so unapologetic, and it holds up very weirdly well. It's 9 minutes long. So basically there's a part 1 and part 2.
I remember. It never ends. Yeah.
It just never ends. Now there's a part 2, which we'll get to. But this song's weirdly important in the way that it really just directly and graphically and unapologetically kind of stretched the bounds. It's an interesting composition. It's kind of silly in a way, but also musically kind of interesting. I mean, there's the sort of groove and that sort of, I don't know, man. It's a peculiar song, but one that if you didn't already get it during the first 2 tracks, that George Michael was here to do something that was pretty in your face. It was the song met, no surprise, plenty of controversy. It was limited on BBC radio to certain day parts due to the they said it was the suggestive nature. I don't think there's anything suggestive about it. It's I want your sex. Let's go.
Father figure was suggestive. This is like KT didn't. I don't know if this is even accurate, but I remember hearing at some point, didn't he like reject the song almost immediately after the album came out? Like, didn't he hate it?
So it was an interesting, time period, because you got to remember that this was during the height of AIDS awareness, and out comes this song that's basically, talking about casual sex being not just appreciated, but pretty heavily desired, to the point where I remember, I'm sure you remember too, George Michael had to do a little
the disclaimer
before the video.
That's right.
So they ran the video for a short period of time, and there was a lot of backlash, and a lot of it had to do with, hey, we're out here trying to promote this message around AIDS awareness and having safe sex and being careful and all these type of things. And then, you're coming out here with this huge hit song that's essentially shredding a lot of that. So he actually did a little spoken disclaimer that basically, I remember the key part to his disclaimer was, this song is not about casual sex. and it was like, oh, really, George? Then what's it about exactly?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What are you metaphoring here?
It was essentially like, enjoy the song and do what you want to it. Just use protection while you do it. Buy my record, but use protection while you buy it. It's something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there were a lot of things going on culturally at the moment that were certainly interesting, but it didn't limit the appeal for this song in any way. And it's just very, very 80s. I mean, this is just, again, something that you just couldn't, sort of pull off today. Nubs, musically, silliness aside, what do you think of this? There's synth and there's keys and there's, electronics going on. I mean, what do you think? Or do you just think it's kind of goofy?
Well, it's certainly goofy. If you don't see that, then you don't have much of a sense of humor. But I kind of put this in the category. There's small category songs like Genesis, I Can't Dance, where the whole song is just built around this beat. And it's almost like you hit on something that's just so catchy. And you're just like, I can do anything on top of this. And then they literally do. And in both cases, the lyrics just kind of take this otherwise punchy, memorable pop sensibility and make it a little bit absurd in two totally different directions. But same idea. I just, when by all accounts of Genesis wrote I Can't Dance, they just set the drum box to do, and then it's
a great comparison, actually. Well, Nubs, hey, you think we're done with I Want Your Sex? You think we're done? We're not even close to done. We still got part 2. Hit it. Yeah. I mean, this goes on. This right here goes on for like 5 more minutes. And it breaks down and it, kind of like, but I mean, so tell me, do you think part 1 is kind of is part 1 kind of like the foreplay, and then part 2 is where you're just getting busy? Is that kind of how this works?
Wow, that's a great thought.
I mean, just think about it. Just like just think about it. Like you had the prelude, and then now it's right. Just
yeah. Kind of setting the stage.
I'm glad nobody can see what we're doing right now.
And then it's like, boom, da, 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 and then the horns, the fake horns, just all come.
Yeah,
those might be real. Actually, there are guys playing real horns.
They probably are real at that time. Yeah.
But it's a totally absurd song. But the rhythm is, the guy wrote amazing hooks musically and vocally. I mean, the main hook of the song might be come on.
Yeah, exactly.
And think about just like going back to Father Figure, just think about the last like 30 seconds of that song, trademark conclusion. Like there, he put hooks into everything. Faith has 10 hooks in that song. So, artistically, maybe to go back to your earlier question, maybe one of the issues with him artistically is that he was so hooky that sometimes, you don't realize someone's making this stuff up. And he was very gifted at that for sure, obviously.
Kurt Cobain disease, right? You got all these hooks and
no place to go.
and no place to go.
Yeah.
All right, man. This is the song. Now, I want you to make the case after this that George Michael is an exceptional vocalist here on yet another number one single off this record with One More Try.
Oh, so I don't wanna learn to hold you, touch you, think that you're mine, because there ain't no joy
All right, so
for an
you've kind of touched on this a couple times here so far. There are these songs that, when you're 7, you kind of think are kind of dumb. This is like old people music, right? And then you're a teenager and you think they're even dumber. It's like, man, this is like, ooh, my mom used to listen to this, And then you're in your 20s and you're kind of like, okay, sort of get it. And then you're, where we are, in your early 30s. That's where we are, right?
Yeah, I wish.
And you listen to something and you're like, okay, like that's good. Really, One More Try is not really my style. It's slow, but I do, you used a great word earlier with father figure space. And I know that you're a fan of space. And if you are, then, you got to at least appreciate that of One More Try. And it's not as boring. I used to think this is a very boring song, but as you listen to kind of the vocal element and how it builds, and I don't think it needs to be 6 minutes long, which it is. But part of that is the sort of drawn out nature of it and sort of building you to this place where, this is all George. This is all vocal. What's going on in the background is pretty minimalist and pretty spacious. So it really relies on a very, very unique. There are only a few vocalists I think that could pull this song off. You got to be able to carry it. And he did, and it's a great hit. And it's a song that I now have. I wouldn't say that I love it, but I sure as hell have an appreciation for what it is. That at least I didn't have before. So Nubs, make the case. Why is George Michael not that great of a singer after hearing One More Try?
Well, I will say it's the most outstanding vocal performance on the album. Just the way he goes in and out of the falsetto is, it's very effective. I still think it's in a pretty limited range. He does.
There's no doubt about that. He's not, loaded with range. There's no question.
Yeah. Yeah. But without a doubt, it's a very notable vocal performance. It's a fascinating single. I do love the space. The space brings out all the little intricate layers. This album has tremendous intricacies in it. I remember I don't know if you ever saw the 7-inch single. This was notable too. It was a long song, but the cover of it, I don't know if you ever saw this, but the cover art was just like, it was like a beige sleeve. And on the front, all it said was One More Try, period. It didn't say anything. It didn't say his name or anything like that. And on one hand, it's a little pretentious. On the other hand, maybe there's a statement being made just about that this song should just sort of, speak for itself in a way, But I think in terms of the album, right, we could talk about the song for a long time. And in terms of the album, it rounds out this, epic 4-song run. Yeah. Where you just get a little bit of everything, you really do. And this is obviously more the ballad type of deal. And I'm with you, T. I didn't like this song growing up. I agree. I thought it was boring. In the last week, listening to this album nonstop, I do have an appreciation for it. I don't know that I'd want to drive around listening to it a whole lot, but I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that a song like this could have been a hit in 1987, 88. That's a pretty cool thing. So
yeah. Yeah, for me, it's definitely a song you file into, rolled my eyes at it when I was young, and now you listen to it and you really appreciate it. So that's good to hear.
Good call. Yeah.
Well, that's, that faith, father figure, I want your sex and one more try, that cannot sustain. And let's just pause there for a second, which I think you make a great point. That is really, it's the first side of the record. And that's an incredible side. Now 3 of those songs were number 1. And I mean, can you imagine in 1987 when people flipped the record and just absorbed side A and they're like, wow, you know, a lot of things here that you hadn't heard before, a lot of boundaries being pushed, a lot of edginess, a really, really nicely and interestingly produced and performed record. That can't sustain though. It's not like you can have a side B that's quite that good, but there had to be a moment here where you're kind of flipping the record saying, wow, I just heard something that's pretty special.
You're not going to stay that hot for the whole game. I mean, it's a
Right.
blistering start, but yeah, at some point, a little cool off was needed, I think.
Indeed. We get to that cool off here and side 2 with some deep, we get into some album tracks here with Hard Day.
Won't you give me a break? Somebody give me a break now. Don't put me down.
You know, some of these things, they start to sound a little dated, but the thing that's kind of interesting about Hard Day is that you could hear 5 seconds of it and realize that it's George Michael. So whether you kind of like it or not, or again, whether it holds up to the first 4 songs, there is a very distinct sound here through the electronic elements, through the vocals, through the vocal effects. And like, I don't think I mean, obviously, you know, it doesn't hold up as well as the first 4 tracks. And it's more of an album cut, but I do like that if you were to even hear this on its own, it would play for 5 seconds and you'd be like, oh, that's George Michael. I think there's something, you know, that's positive about that in a way.
It's a great take. This is his signature sound on this album, you know, and he does explore different things as we've already talked about, but it's that big danceable backbeat. You know, it's not really toe tapping. It's like shoulder swaying. You know, that's kind of the way I would describe George Michael's sound. You know what I mean?
By the way, I got to tell everybody, when Nubs said that, he gave a little shoulder shimmy, and I got to say, it looked pretty good.
It looked pretty good. Did it look good as good as his ass looked in the Faith video? Or
no,
that's impossible.
No, not that good. But you got some moves over there, buddy. Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah. When you think about his sound, it just you know what I mean? Like every song could do that. And it's just got a little tiny bit of swing, but it's really, really rigid. And
can you do that again? That was great.
Well, I don't want to confuse it with the Prince sound, which is
yeah, boom.
The George Michael sound is about you know.
And then he's going, don't baby down. Yeah.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty solid. Pretty well done there. Let's get to track 6, Hand to Mouth.
Okay, see, I got to point a couple things out.
Sure.
There's 2 ripoffs in this song that I've discovered. And I looked on the internet. I'm amazed. I didn't see anybody else. Now, one of them's George Michael ripping off, and then one of them is somebody ripping off George Michael.
Right.
So do me a favor, just play the very beginning of the song. I want you to hear the intro, and then you'll hear what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And pay attention to the piano melody.
Great electronic drums.
Totally. Okay, so you got that piano melody in your head?
Yep.
All right, now pull up. People at home following along. Pull up Kate Bush, Wow.
I knew
you're going to be wowed.
I knew you were going to find a way to work Kate Bush into this episode. I just knew.
I think George Michael was a big fan of Kate Bush. Maybe too big of a fan, as you're about to hear.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a direct ripoff.
Now, Wow is one of my favorite Kate Bush songs. And when I was first...
And Beeks, too.
Yeah, Blake. Yeah, that's right. Beeks loves
Yep.
Wow.
Yep, she did.
And that intro for Wow is You know, that's one of Kate Bush's greatest melodies. It's very famous for Kate Bush fans. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, that's wow. So then I looked and I'm like, oh, he lifted it. Cool. Like, I'm sure there's a credit, you know, there's no credit. There's no acknowledgement. I looked it up on the internet. I've seen nobody make this connection, but it is the same exact melody. We should do like Two Twins in an Album investigates. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm telling you.
You're correct. I even think, I mean, again, just judging by ear, I think they're the same notes, and it's sort of the same progression. Same notes in
the same key, man.
Yeah. Well, I think you're onto something there.
Amazing. Okay, the other one is a reverse ripoff, but this one's even more kind of funny and ridiculous. So go back to the core bass line during the verses.
Right.
Do, 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 do. Now play a little song called Neighbor by Ugly Kid Joe. It's the same riff, dude. Listen to it. It's the same riff.
I think like 50 others have used that progression now. I mean,
well, it's probably right. Yeah.
That's like that's a pretty common. You know, one of the things I always loved about Ugly Kid Joe was the left-handed guitar player. I don't know, for some reason I thought he was super cool.
It's an awesome call.
And Whitfield Crane, by the way, is like a very accomplished vocalist. Like he I mean, he was like a legit, like, classically trained singer and all that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I saw him play once. He joined Life of Agony for like a tour when Life of Agony was between singers. And Whitfield Crane was like a maniac on the stage. I don't know if you ever saw him, but it was, oh my, he was nuts, like legitimately nuts. But yeah, so Ugly Kid Joe, I'm telling you, man, they must have been sitting around listening to a lot of George Michael Faith, you know?
Well,
you can really hear the direct influence.
They may have. I mean, you know, Fred Durst was. So, you know,
right.
Sure, you know what? Who's to say Ugly Kid Joe weren't also fans? You know,
and that one's more just funny, right? I mean, it is the same progression, but the Kate Bush one. I mean, I got to tell you, he lifted it.
Yeah,
and nobody ever noticed. That's how obscure Kate Bush is. No one ever noticed.
That's a lift. I'm surprised, particularly in the UK. I'm surprised nobody noticed that. But well, good eye, Nubs. Private eye over there, and you're right. Yeah, Two Twins in an Album investigates. Maybe that'll be our first. Maybe you could fulfill your lifelong dream of getting Kate Bush on the show, and you can present to her your case, and then you guys can run off together and get married and live off in the hills somewhere in the English countryside. How's that sound?
You know, I would be interested in all of that, and it wouldn't be for me. It'd be for Blake. You know,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, go back and listen to the Kate Bush Hounds of Love episode, and you will fully understand what we're talking about.
Indeed. Our special guest. Track 7, Look at Your Hands. You gotta love that, like, compressed guitar thing. I mean, it's
yeah, totally.
It's so funny. I mean, not a terribly memorable track here. Obviously, this run of these 3 songs is, you know, you're getting into the sort of deep cuts on Faith. So, you know, it's not anything terrible, but it's not anything terribly memorable. But you know, it's a little groovy. I think kind of like some of that guitar work. I'm sure some killer session musician hit the compression pedal and laid that sucker down for him, huh?
Yeah, totally.
Or shoot, you never know. Maybe George Michael played that himself, you know, as talented as he was.
Exactly. I mean, the guy could do a little bit of everything. It's definitely filler alert here, right? On this particular track. Yeah, but I think what stands out is that George is really, he's thinking a lot about hands. You know, you go hand to mouth, look at your hands. This guy's really into hands.
Yeah.
Put your tiny hand in mine, father figure.
Well, it's also, I think it's a good point to note, you know, we didn't really talk a lot about the album cover, but we did talk about the stubble and the earring and the leather jacket. But, you know, is he smelling himself on the cover? That's, it looks like he's doing like a pit check, you know, like one of those before you go on the date, you just give yourself a little whiff to make sure that the deodorant settled in properly. Is that what he's doing? I mean, he's kind of lifting the jacket, looking like he's going for a little sniff. What do you think?
So it could be a sniff check. It's I think it's probably a little more likely that it's some Columbia Records staff photographer saying, "Hey, just lift your jacket up a little bit, just so we can see a little bit of your chest."
Right. Yeah.
Let's just get a little tease in here for everybody.
I think it's one of those. I mean, I think nobody ever really looked at it because it's just like, oh, he's sexy and there he is. But if you really look at it, I think he's doing a pit check.
Dude, you could be right. So this has been a productive Two Twins in an Album. We've uncovered that George Michael is immensely talented, that he rips off Kate Bush, and that he does pit checks regularly.
Yeah, and that he
so much
himself.
So that they had to capture him on film. It's like, guys, we don't have any pictures of George where he's not smelling his pits.
Yeah, he's also clutching something with his left hand. I can't really tell. It looks like he's maybe just clutching his jacket. I don't know.
It's his jacket.
Yeah.
You know what I think he's doing, T? Okay, again, some staff photographer. I think what he's doing there is they wanted to get the cross earring in the picture. Mm-hmm. So I think what he's actually doing is pulling down that side of his jacket because you got to get the cross earring in there.
Yeah.
If not, I think it'd be blocked. And that cross earring was clearly going to become a big part of his brand. We've referenced it many times,
Yeah. Interesting.
That's my thought.
Well, as we keep picking apart the George Michael album cover, let's listen to Monkey. Yeah, so, apparently George was like, all right, that's enough deep cuts. Let's hit him with one more number one here, second to last track, and did so with Monkey. This was a huge song, number one in the US, rounded out the 4 number ones on the record, big time dance track. Seems like it kind of combines, it takes all the different elements, of the previous songs, the space, the up-tempo-ness, the sort of bounce, and then obviously a vocal and lyric performance that's pretty memorable. So not terribly surprising that this was a big hit. And, for second to last track, probably one that after 3 kind of album cuts, and I agree with you on Filler Alert on Look at Your Hands, probably was important to the record to kind of throw this, just hit him with one more number one on side B, just so side B doesn't become the complete JV to side one. And so probably important that Monkey made the appearance on this when it did.
I actually really kind of loved Monkey. When I was a kid, I was so confused by it. Like, why is this guy singing about the monkey? Like, I don't, I'm just thinking like the animal.
It's probably good that at that time you were confused more so. I mean, if you were like, oh, I get it, like at 7, probably would have been kind of concerning. Yeah.
The beat is very infectious. It's certainly dance floor. This album was just very, very confusing as a kid, and this added to it. It's like, wait a minute. So this guy talks about faith, and then he wants sex, and then he does this like crying during One More Time. And then he's talking about father figures and tiny hands.
Covers the gamut, doesn't it, buddy?
Yeah. Now he's talking about monkeys. It's like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? So yeah, it's a fascinating album to rediscover as an adult. I mean, we touched on it earlier. It's recommended that people rediscover it as an adult because for those of us that grew up in this era, it's a totally different perception that you'll have of this record than, what you thought at 7 or 8 or 9,
Well, and as if it wasn't already, well-rounded or covering the gamut enough, you get a little bit of old school flavor here on the closing track, which is Kissing a Fool.
I'm never gonna be your son. I'll pick up the pieces.
every singer at some point have to like do their Tony Bennett thing? You know, like why? I don't get it.
Isn't it something though that on the same album you have "I Want Your Sex" and then you have this? I mean,
it is.
I don't know. I don't know if that's just insane or if that's like super cool. I mean, maybe it's somewhere in the middle. The vocals were recorded a cappella, which is interesting. Lyrically, again, Monkey and this are really talking about, sort of his fame and his reputation and, how he's not sure he can find proper love because of his rap. I mean, it's pretty deep and pretty soulful and pretty interesting. Now, I don't particularly like it. I think a lot of people did. I think a lot of, George Michael fans really see this as a moment to kind of get an idea for his full artistry.
It was a single. Amazingly enough, last single on the record. Like, who would have thought?
It sure was. I mean, it reached 29th on the Billboard Adult Contemporary. So, I mean, it definitely was a song that moved a bit. Michael Bublé covered it on his one of his early albums. It's incredible the diversity of this record. And I think rounding it out in this fashion with not a song that I particularly like, but one that kind of gives you one last, hey, I'm doing this my way and I'm doing this in a way that's trying to cover a lot of different bases, but do it genuinely. You have to kind of respect. And I think that that's sort of part of what led to this song sort of landing, certainly commercially in a way, but critically in a way from not just his fans, but from clearly some other crooners that sort of respected, George Michael as a vocalist.
I mean, you've done a great job all episode of making the case for him as an artist. And this just kind of confirms that. It's really interesting that he would do it. And, some of it might be that they just knew they had a hit machine here. So, hey, George, this track can be yours.
Do whatever you want. Yeah.
But let's just assume that's the case. And for him to choose to do that it gives him a ton of credibility. Trying to make the case of him as a artist that should be deeply respected by all music fans. It's an easy case to make after you listen to this album top to bottom. Now, maybe not if you just know Faith and I Want Your Sex from the radio, but when you listen to the record and you kind of hear how it concludes, again, I don't like it. I don't like that all these singers have to do their the Tony Bennett moment.
Yeah.
But it's very respectable. And he does an exceptional job with the performance on it for sure.
Well, that rounds it out, buddy. George Michael, Faith, 1987. Certainly, with the exception of Jagged Little Pill, the best selling and most commercially successful record that we have discussed. Now, did it matter?
It mattered on a variety of fronts. It launched, a career that I don't think hit its potential, right? I really don't. I don't think George Michael hit his potential throughout the ensuing, decades of his career. One of the reasons why I think it really matters is because it was so edgy, and that's just the word I would use to describe this record top to bottom. It's just a very edgy album. It was on the edge of what the pop mainstream can handle, what the dance floor can handle, what radio can handle, what record sales can handle. And it dabbled in all these different edgy aspects brilliantly. And that's why I think it rose to the level that it did in terms of commercial success. I also think it's a great example of this element we've talked about a few times on the podcast, which is controversy sells, and with the whole deal with I Want Your Sex and the edits and the disclaimer in the video and all that. I mean, it just, all that did was boost awareness of this album and boost the demand for it. And so I think you had a lot of other copycats come along and try and manufacture controversy. I don't think George Michael was doing that at all. I think it was part of his artistic sensibility it was authentic. Let's just say that it was an authentic artistic thing for him to be controversial. And that helped. So I think for both of those reasons, I think it matters a ton. What do you think, man? Does it matter?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you sell 25 million copies of a record and in some way or another, it didn't matter. Some more than others there, Doris, but obviously, I think you make a great point. The statement that this was making you see this story happen a lot where there's, a group and then an artist, decides to branch off from that group and become a solo artist. And they sort of feel the need to do it in a big, bold, grand way. Oftentimes that can come across as ingenuine, or that can come across as, being forced or being too much of a think tank or something that came out of a focus group rather than an artist. The thing that's cool about revisiting Faith is that you do realize that this is coming from the artist. This is an artist kind of saying, hey, I know I've done what I've done before, but with my solo project, I'm going to write differently. I'm going to record differently. I'm going to produce differently. And I think that what really shines here is George Michael's production, just as much as the songwriting, the sort of cleanness, the tightness of the approach. Obviously when you're trying to pull off some of these songs, you've got to get the tempos right. You've got to get the synth effect right. You've got to get, the layering right. If you don't get some of those things correct, it's going to be very difficult. This was a very electronica album at a time where, that was still something that it was being done a lot in a pop sense. I mean, he wasn't just creating songs, he was creating, tracks. He was creating
textures.
There's a difference in the vernacular back then between a song and a record. And George Michael was making records, and I think that was part of what was cool about the approach, and part of what it signaled to the industry is that, you can push the boundaries, you can push right to the edge and still gain a lot of appeal. I think you make a great point on this being an adult album. This was not one that, screaming teenage girls were going to the arena to watch George Michael. This was moms and, and people that, sort of understood a lot of the content and a lot of the approach and a lot of the sort of vibe of it. And it certainly hit at a good time. It's not an album that could have been made now, but boy, part of me kind of misses the days when you could make an album like this and people wouldn't take it too seriously and people would have fun with it. And
it wouldn't get offended by it.
Yeah. Wouldn't find a way to get offended or triggered or find fault with it. Instead, you just kind of understand that it's something that is meant to create a certain vibe and maybe make you, think or appreciate music in a different way. But mostly something to kind of have fun with. I think there's a lot of fun on the record. And I long for the days when, an artist can come out with something again like Faith, which pushes the boundary so hard. And instead of, finding fault or being resistant, people can find a way to just enjoy it. And
I just want to make very clear to you, I am very triggered by this album by George Michael's ass. Triggers me. It triggers a lot of things.
Aren't we all, buddy? Let's get to the final cut. Are you putting this one on the turntable in the collection, collecting dust, or in the for sale bin? Where do you got Faith, buddy? I'm excited for this one. What do you think?
I'm putting Faith on the turntable. It is just
right.
You talk about an album that really represents the 1980s in a way that is not just popular, but cutting edge, right? And I think you just nailed it. Push the boundaries. And by pushing the boundaries musically, lyrically, in terms of image, in terms of, themes, I think that Faith stands as an album that not only must be owned, but is something that still holds up incredibly well top to bottom to listen to. A fun record. It's an interesting record. It's an engaging record. You listen to it, you're engaged on what's going on. And yeah, it's got a couple things that, maybe a little excessive, maybe a little outdated, but even those things have their charm, right? Because to your point, it was a time period where he could do it and not just get away with it, but succeed from it. And you got to love that. So it's on the turntable for me too.
That's great. Let me ask you this. How does I Want Your Sex sound on wax?
Sounds really good, actually. Really good.
Do you have a good copy of this?
I have a really good copy of this. Actually, in terms of vinyl nerds, you're going to just think this is so ridiculous, but I'm used to it. If you could find, an original pressing that's still in the shrink wrap, that's a good thing.
Okay.
If you find original shrink wrap and hype sticker, then you're golden. My version of Faith has shrink wrap and hype sticker, and the vinyl's in perfect shape.
I wish you all could see the excitement in Nubs' face as he describes the hype sticker. It's adorable. He's just so happy.
The hype sticker gets me almost as excited as George Michael's.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, I'm going in the collection. It's a classic. It's, that 3-song run on side B just takes it out of the turntable for me. And it's not that they're bad songs. It's, and we've talked about this before. Sometimes, a record is so hot for a sequence that it's not that the other songs are bad. It's just that, it's impossible to sustain that. So sometimes you can be sort of your own worst enemy in that way. But listen, this is an album that I think has a lot of importance. The boundary pushing was important. I have mad respect for the fact that he wrote and produced the record. I think that that's very, very noteworthy, and certainly was one of the things that jumped out at me early on in kind of assessing whether or not this would be a good one to discuss. And Nubs, I think you nailed it top to bottom. I'm just going in the collection mostly because I think that there's an element of that trifecta of deep cuts that can be a little bit of a grind, but not enough to take it any lower than that.
And I'm sure you're deeply offended that he ripped off Kate Bush too.
Well, listen, that was very eye-opening. I think we should think about this thing. Let's get in touch with Kate Bush's people and see if we can bring this to her attention.
Kate Bush, please call me. If you're out there listening, please call me so we can discuss.
I've been wanting to play matchmaker with you and Kate Bush for many years. Nubs, hey, what do you say? I think we need to ice down a little bit here and cool down the episode a little bit with some in your head. What do you got, Dolores? Let's go.
In your head.
Nub, what's in your head?
Teach you 3 things, songs that have come across the old playlist that I've been enjoying this past week. First of all would be the song Shatterday by Vendetta Red. A major label band that didn't really take off, but Shatterday was sort of a very mild radio hit. It's very good. Second would be the Moody Blues, some of their 80s output. I Know You're Out There Somewhere. Very, very good Moody Blues track.
Great song.
And then lastly is a live.
I actually always preferred, you're either kind of a I Know You're Out There Somewhere guy or a Your Wildest Dreams guy. I've always been an I Know You're Out There Somewhere kind of guy.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I'm definitely Your Wildest Dreams guy, but I like them both for sure.
Yeah, they're both great.
They really are. And last is a live version of the song Gravity Grave. This is by The Verve. This version is found on the No Come Down compilation, and it is an awesome live version of Gravity Grave. It's huge. And Ashcroft is just, thankfully he didn't have his mysterious non-death at this point.
It's, it's good that he got some songs like that out before his untimely passing.
Yeah, his untimely non-death. T, what is in your head?
I got an old country song by Jerry Jeff Walker called Pissin' in the Wind. My kids love it. I love it. It's a great song. I probably shouldn't play it for my kids, but
It's a great kid song.
Yeah. I've never been terribly good at parenting. Second song is by XTC. And this is the Mayor of Simpleton off the Oranges and Lemons record. Wonderful album. That's a band we may have to talk about at some point.
I think so. That'd be good. Yeah, be good.
Yeah, I think they'd be good to talk about. And then let's also throw in there just a little song by a couple ladies known as Heart. And one of their, I like 80s Heart. I like 80s pop, Big Ann. I like the Big Ann era of Heart.
Yeah.
And one of the songs from them I love called Nothing at All. Nubs, thanks, man. What a fascinating discussion about George Michael's faith, and really appreciate all your great takes. That was good stuff, man.
Love the choice as always. And, maybe now you won't accuse me of being so biased all the time.
Hey, listen, you gave this one a extremely great and fair assessment. And it's not just because you put on the turntable. I just really listen, Nubs. Sometimes you're just
always give fair assessment.
Listen,
I always give fair assessment.
Sometimes you're just on your A game. And today, man, you just brought it. You brought it.
Well, I was inspired by George Michael's. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, that caboose is
that's a nice one. It's a tight one.
It is. It's a tight pack. Hey, let's see if you bring your A game on episode 58, which we will be back with next week. But until then, we hope you enjoyed Heinz 57 sauce. And what really is in that sauce? I know there's ketchup.
Saucy.
I'm sure there's some Worcestershire and some other things, but who cares about that? All we care about right now is wrapping up episode 57, and we will see you next week on Two Twins and an Album. Y'all take care.
Two Twins and
an album. Well, that's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.